the heat pressed down like a heavy blanket. Thomas wiped his forehead for the 100th time, but the sweat kept coming. His legs ached from standing in the same spot for 3 hours, but he wouldn't move. Not today. The crowd around him buzzed with excitement. Children waved small flags while their parents checked their phones, hoping to catch the perfect moment. Everyone had come to see the royal family, but Thomas had a different reason for being there. 6 months ago, his daughter Emma had been diagnosed with a rare form of childhood cancer. The doctors said experimental treatment was her only hope, but it cost more money than Thomas could ever imagine. His insurance wouldn't cover it. The bank had already refused his loan application twice. That's when he heard about Princess Charlotte's new charity initiative for children's medical research. She had announced it just last month, promising to personally review cases that needed urgent help. Thomas had written letter after letter, made phone call after phone call, but nothing seemed to work. The royal staff were polite but distant, always promising someone would get back to him. Then, Thomas learned about today's public appearance. Princess Charlotte would be opening a new children's hospital wing, and she would walk along the barrier to meet people. This was his chance. His only chance. Emma didn't know he was here. She thought he was at work, trying to earn extra money for her treatment. She was at home with her grandmother, probably coloring in her favorite book or watching cartoons. At 8 years old, she was too young to understand why Daddy looked so worried all the time, why Mommy cried in the bathroom when she thought no one was listening. The sun climbed higher in the sky. Thomas felt his shirt sticking to his back, but he didn't care. Other people had brought umbrellas and water bottles, but Thomas had rushed here straight from his night shift at the factory. He'd been awake for 20 hours, but adrenaline kept him alert. A woman next to him offered him some water from her bottle. "You look ready to collapse," she said kindly. "Are you feeling all right?" Thomas smiled gratefully but shook his head. "I'm fine, thank you. Just excited to see Princess Charlotte." The woman studied his face. There was something desperate in his eyes that made her worry. "She's wonderful with people, especially children." "Are you here with your family?" "My daughter couldn't come today," Thomas said quietly. "She's not well enough for crowds." The woman's expression softened. She understood without him saying more. "I hope she gets better soon." "Thank you," Thomas whispered. "I hope so too." More people kept arriving, pushing closer to the barrier. Thomas found himself squeezed between a teenager taking selfies and an elderly man who kept checking his watch. The security guards reminded everyone to stay behind the ropes, but Thomas noticed how some people pushed forward anyway. He thought about Emma's smile when he tucked her into bed last night. She'd asked him to read her favorite story about a brave princess who saved her kingdom. Emma always said she wanted to be brave like the princess in the story. If only she knew how brave she already was, fighting her illness every single day. The crowd suddenly grew quiet. Someone shouted, "They're coming!" Thomas felt his heart start racing. In the distance, he could see the royal cars approaching. This was really happening. His hands began to shake. What would he say? How could he explain everything in just a few seconds? He'd practiced his words 1,000 times, but now his mind felt blank. A security guard walked past, speaking into his radio. Thomas caught fragments of conversation about timing and crowd control. The royal visit was planned down to the minute, he realized. There might only be seconds when Princess Charlotte stopped near him. Emma's face flashed through his mind again. Her pale cheeks, her tired eyes, her stubborn determination to keep playing even when the treatments made her sick. She deserved every chance at life. Thomas would stand in this blazing sun for days if it meant helping her. The cars were getting closer now. Thomas could feel the excitement building in the crowd around him. Children were lifted onto their parents' shoulders. Cameras came out. Everyone wanted to capture this moment. Thomas closed his eyes for a second and said a silent prayer. He'd never been particularly religious, but desperate times had taught him the value of hope. When he opened his eyes, he saw the first royal car pulling up to the hospital entrance. This was it. After months of sleepless nights and unanswered letters, after watching his daughter fight for her life while he felt helpless, he finally had a chance to do something. The sun beat down mercilessly, but Thomas barely felt it anymore. All that mattered was the next few minutes. Everything depended on what happened when Princess Charlotte walked along this barrier. Thomas straightened his shoulders and, prepared to fight for his daughter's life, Princess Charlotte stepped out of the car with the grace that came from years of royal training. She wore a light blue dress that seemed perfect for the occasion, and her smile lit up the entire crowd. Thomas felt his breath catch in his throat. She was smaller than he'd expected, more human somehow than the figure he'd seen in newspapers and on television. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Flags waved frantically as people called out her name. Princess Charlotte waved back, taking her time to look at different sections of the crowd. She seemed genuinely happy to be there, not just going through the motions. Thomas watched as she was greeted by hospital officials and local dignitaries. They surrounded her with handshakes and formal introductions, but he could see her eyes constantly moving toward the people waiting behind the barriers. She wanted to meet them, he realized. This wasn't just duty for her. The formal part of the visit began with a tour of the new hospital wing. Thomas could see them through the large glass windows as they moved from room to room. Princess Charlotte stopped to examine medical equipment and asked questions that seemed to genuinely interest her. She took notes in a small notebook, nodding seriously as doctors explained various procedures. But what struck Thomas most was what happened when they brought her to the children's ward. Through the window, he watched her face completely transform. The formal royal expression melted away, replaced by something warm and real. She knelt down to talk to a little boy in a wheelchair, and, even from this distance, Thomas could see the child's face light up with joy. The sun continued its relentless assault. Thomas felt dizzy for a moment and gripped the barrier tighter. The woman next to him noticed and offered him water again, more insistently this time. "Please, you really don't look well," she said. "The heat is dangerous." Thomas accepted a small sip but handed the bottle back quickly. "Thank you, but I need to save my spot." "She'll walk along the whole barrier," the woman assured him. "You don't need to worry about missing her." But Thomas did worry. He'd noticed that royal visits followed strict schedules. If Princess Charlotte was running late, her staff might cut the public walkabout short. He'd read about it happening before at other events. He couldn't risk losing this opportunity. Inside the hospital, the tour continued. Thomas saw Princess Charlotte in what appeared to be a meeting room, surrounded by doctors and charity officials. They showed her charts and documents, probably explaining the funding needs for new equipment and research programs. She listened intently, occasionally asking questions or making notes. A man beside Thomas started complaining loudly about the wait. "How long are they going to keep us standing here?" he grumbled. "Some of us have jobs to get back to." Thomas wanted to tell him that some things were more important than jobs, but he kept quiet. He understood the man's frustration, though. The heat was becoming almost unbearable, and they'd been standing there for over 4 hours now. Several people had already given up and left. The crowd was noticeably smaller than when Thomas had first arrived. But those who remained seemed more determined, more invested in actually meeting Princess Charlotte rather than just catching a glimpse of royalty. A group of children from a local school had been positioned near one end of the barrier. Their teacher kept reminding them to stand nicely and remember their manners when the princess came to speak with them. Thomas envied their organized approach. They had a plan, probably had practiced what they would say. Thomas reached into his pocket and touched the envelope he'd been carrying for months. Inside was a letter he'd written to Princess Charlotte, along with copies of Emma's medical records and treatment estimates. He'd also included a photograph of Emma at her last birthday party, before she got sick. In the picture, she was laughing at something silly her cousin had said, her face glowing with health and happiness. The memory of that day felt like a lifetime ago now. Emma had blown out all 8 candles on her cake and made a wish. When Thomas asked her what she'd wished for, she said it was a secret. Now he wondered if somehow she'd already known she would need all the help she could get. A commotion near the hospital entrance caught everyone's attention. Princess Charlotte was coming back outside, flanked by security guards and hospital officials. The crowd pressed forward eagerly, but the barriers held firm. Thomas's heart began pounding so hard he thought others might hear it. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Princess Charlotte was walking toward the barrier, and she was smiling at the people gathered there. She started at the far end, where the school children were waiting. Thomas watched as she knelt down to their level, speaking to each child individually. She seemed to have an endless supply of patience and genuine interest in what they had to say. One little girl presented her with a handmade card, and Princess Charlotte's face showed such delight that the crowd collectively sighed with appreciation. Slowly, she began making her way along the barrier. She stopped frequently, shaking hands and chatting with people. Thomas noticed that she didn't just exchange pleasantries, she actually listened to what people told her. When an elderly woman mentioned her grandson in the military, Princess Charlotte asked specific questions about where he was stationed and how long he'd been serving. The sun was now at its peak intensity. Thomas felt sweat dripping down his back and his legs wobbling beneath him. But Princess Charlotte was getting closer, maybe 20 people away from where he stood. He could hear her voice now, warm and genuine as she spoke to each person. Thomas rehearsed his words one more time. He would introduce himself, mention Emma's name, and hand her the envelope. He would ask her to please consider his daughter's case for her charity program. It had to be quick but memorable. He might only have 30 seconds of her attention. 15 people away. 10 people away. Thomas's mouth felt completely dry, but he didn't dare drink more water and risk needing to leave his spot. 5 people away. He could see her clearly now, could see the kindness in her eyes as she spoke to a young mother about her baby. 3 people away. Thomas's hands began to shake so violently he had trouble getting the envelope out of his pocket. 2 people away. Princess Charlotte was speaking to the elderly man who had been checking his watch all day. She listened patiently as he told her about his late wife's volunteer work at the hospital. 1 person away. The woman with the water bottle was presenting Princess Charlotte with a small gift from her community group. Thomas heard Princess Charlotte thank her warmly and promised to treasure it. Then, she turned toward Thomas, and their eyes met. Princess Charlotte looked directly at Thomas, and something in her expression changed. Perhaps it was the desperation in his eyes, or the way he stood despite clearly being exhausted from the heat, but she seemed to sense that this encounter was different. "Hello," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Thank you for waiting so patiently in this terrible heat." Thomas felt her hand in his, surprisingly strong and warm. For a moment, he couldn't speak. All his rehearsed words disappeared. "Your Highness," he finally managed, his voice cracking slightly. "You look like you've been standing here for hours," she observed, genuine concern in her voice. "Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," Thomas said quickly, then realized this was his moment. "Your Highness, I have a letter for you. About my daughter." Something shifted in Princess Charlotte's expression. She'd probably received hundreds of letters and requests during public appearances, but she didn't look annoyed or dismissive. Instead, she stepped slightly closer to the barrier. "Tell me about your daughter," she said simply. Thomas felt his heart racing. Around them, he was vaguely aware of cameras clicking and people trying to listen, but Princess Charlotte's attention was focused entirely on him. He pulled out the envelope with shaking hands. "Her name is Emma. She's 8 years old, and she has cancer." The words came out in a rush. "The treatment she needs isn't covered by our insurance. I've written to your charity program several times, but I never heard back. I know you must get thousands of letters, but Emma is running out of time." Princess Charlotte took the envelope without hesitation. "How long has she been ill?" 6 months, Thomas replied. "She was diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia. The doctors say there's a new experimental treatment that could save her life, but it costs more money than I can ever earn." Thomas watched as Princess Charlotte's face grew more serious. She held the envelope carefully, as if it contained something precious. "What's her full name?" Emma Louise Harrison, Thomas said. She's the bravest little girl you'd ever meet. She never complains, even when the treatments make her sick. She loves to draw pictures of princesses. At this, Princess Charlotte smiled slightly. Does she know you're here today? No, Thomas admitted. She thinks I'm at work. She's at home with her grandmother, probably coloring or watching her favorite shows. I didn't want to worry her if nothing came of this. Princess Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. Around them, Thomas could hear her security detail murmuring about staying on schedule, but she seemed to ignore them completely. How are you holding up? She asked Thomas. This must be incredibly difficult for you and your wife. Thomas felt tears threatening and blinked them back quickly. We're managing. My wife Sarah works nights at the hospital, ironically, in the same hospital we're standing outside of. I work days at a factory. We're both picking up extra shifts whenever we can, but it's not nearly enough. And Emma? How is she coping with everything? She's amazing, Thomas said, his voice growing stronger as he talked about his daughter. She asks me to read her stories about brave princesses every night. She says when she grows up, she wants to help other sick children get better. Even while she's fighting for her own life, she's thinking about helping others. Princess Charlotte was quiet for a moment, still holding the envelope. Thomas could see her processing everything he'd told her. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Thomas, I want you to know that I read every letter that comes to my office personally. Sometimes it takes time because we try to verify all the medical information and coordinate with treatment centers, but every case gets reviewed. Thomas felt a flicker of hope. Does that mean you might have already seen Emma's case? I honestly don't know, Princess Charlotte replied. We process hundreds of applications, and sometimes the system isn't as efficient as it should be. But I promise you that I will personally review Emma's case as soon as I return to London. She paused, looking directly into Thomas's eyes. More than that, I'm going to give you my private secretary's direct contact information. I want you to call her tomorrow morning and reference this conversation. We're going to make sure Emma's case gets the urgent attention it deserves. Thomas felt the world spinning slightly, whether from the heat or the unexpected turn this conversation was taking. Your Highness, I can't thank you enough. Don't thank me yet, she said with a gentle smile. But I promise you that by the end of this week, someone from my team will have contacted Emma's doctors to discuss her treatment options. Princess Charlotte reached into her small purse and pulled out a business card. She wrote something on the back of it before handing it to Thomas. This is Margaret Wilson, my private secretary. Tell her I asked her to prioritize Emma's case immediately. Thomas took the card with trembling hands. On the back, Princess Charlotte had written Emma Harrison urgent personal request from Princess Charlotte. There's one more thing, she said, surprising Thomas. Would Emma like to receive a letter from me? Sometimes when children are going through difficult treatments, it helps to know that people are thinking about them. Thomas felt tears coming again, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. She would be over the moon. She's always dreamed of meeting a real princess. Then, she'll have her letter by the weekend, Princess Charlotte promised. And, Thomas, please don't give up hope. Medical research is advancing so rapidly, and there are new treatments becoming available all the time. Emma sounds like a fighter. She is, Thomas said firmly. She gets that from her mother. Princess Charlotte smiled. And, from her father, I think. Standing in this heat for hours to fight for your daughter takes tremendous courage. The security team was becoming more insistent about moving along, but Princess Charlotte held up her hand to indicate she needed another moment. Thomas, I'm going to be completely honest with you about something. Even with our charity program, we can't help every child who needs it. There simply isn't enough funding. But sometimes, when I meet families like yours, it reminds me why this work is so important. She looked around at the hospital building behind them, then back at Thomas. This new wing we're opening today will treat hundreds of children. But it's cases like Emma's that show us we still have so much more work to do. Thomas nodded, not sure what to say to such honesty. I can't promise you a specific outcome, Princess Charlotte continued. But, I can promise you that Emma's case will receive every consideration, and that she'll know she has someone in her corner who believes in her. That's all I can ask for, Thomas replied. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Princess Charlotte reached through the barrier and squeezed Thomas's hand one more time. Give Emma my love. Tell her that a princess is thinking about her and hoping she feels better soon. As she began to move on to the next person, Thomas realized that something extraordinary had just happened. This wasn't just a polite royal encounter. Princess Charlotte had seen something in him, in Emma's story, that had touched her personally. Thomas stood frozen in place as Princess Charlotte moved on to the next person, but he could see her glancing back at him several times. The business card in his hand felt like the most valuable thing he'd ever possessed. Around him, other people were asking what she had said to him, but Thomas was still processing the conversation himself. The woman with the water bottle touched his arm gently. That was incredible, she whispered. I've never seen her spend so much time with one person during a walkabout. She must have really connected with your story. Thomas nodded, still feeling slightly dazed. She's going to help my daughter, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. She's actually going to help Emma. But, even as relief flooded through him, Thomas realized that Princess Charlotte was still making her way down the barrier, and something unusual was happening. Instead of the quick handshakes and brief exchanges that had characterized the rest of her walkabout, she seemed to be slowing down, spending more time with each person. Thomas watched as she spoke with a young mother holding a toddler. The conversation lasted several minutes, and he saw Princess Charlotte write something else on another business card. Then, she moved to an elderly couple, and, again, the interaction was longer and more personal than typical royal protocol would suggest. A security guard approached Thomas. Excuse me, sir, but Her Royal Highness has asked if you could wait here after the walkabout concludes. She'd like to speak with you again. Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. Of course. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, the guard assured him. Please just remain in this area when the crowd disperses. As Princess Charlotte continued along the barrier, Thomas began to understand what was happening. The conversation about Emma hadn't ended her interest in helping people today, it had sparked something. She was now asking more detailed questions of everyone she met, collecting stories, taking notes, handing out business cards with personal messages written on them. The formal royal visit had transformed into something much more personal and immediate. A reporter who had been covering the event approached Thomas. Excuse me, I couldn't help but notice that you had quite an extensive conversation with Princess Charlotte. Would you be willing to share what you discussed? Thomas hesitated. Part of him wanted to protect Emma's privacy, but another part realized that sharing their story might help other families in similar situations. My daughter is very sick, he said carefully. I came here today hoping to get help for her medical treatment. Princess Charlotte listened, and she's promised to personally review Emma's case. The reporter's eyes lit up. Would you be comfortable doing a brief interview? Stories like this show the human side of these royal visits. I'd rather not, Thomas replied. This is about my daughter getting the help she needs, not about publicity. The reporter nodded respectfully but handed Thomas his business card. If you ever want to share Emma's story to help other families, please don't hesitate to call me. Princess Charlotte had now reached the end of the barrier and was speaking with the last group of people. Thomas noticed that her usual entourage of officials looked somewhat confused by her extended interactions with the crowd, but none of them seemed willing to interrupt her. When she finished with the final person, instead of returning to her car as expected, Princess Charlotte walked back toward the area where Thomas was waiting. The crowd, which had begun to disperse, stopped and watched with curiosity. Thomas, she called out as she approached. Thank you for waiting. I wanted to speak with you again. She was accompanied now by a woman in a business suit who Thomas assumed was probably the private secretary she had mentioned, Margaret Wilson. Your story about Emma has been on my mind for the past 30 minutes, Princess Charlotte said directly. I've been thinking about what you said, about how she wants to help other sick children when she grows up. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. I've just been speaking with Margaret here about something. We're always looking for ways to make our charity work more effective, more personal. Too often, we get caught up in the bureaucracy and forget that behind every application is a real family facing an impossible situation. Thomas wasn't sure where this was heading, but he nodded encouragingly. What if Emma's story could help other children right now, even while she's still fighting her own battle? Princess Charlotte asked. Not by exploiting her situation, but by using it to highlight how many families are struggling with medical costs that insurance won't cover. Margaret stepped forward. What Her Royal Highness is proposing is a new initiative where we partner directly with families like yours to show the real impact of childhood illness on entire families. It would involve some media attention, but always with your complete approval and control. Thomas felt overwhelmed. I don't understand. Are you talking about using Emma's case as some kind of example? More than that, Princess Charlotte replied. We're talking about creating a new fast-track program for urgent pediatric cases. Emma would be our first case, but she wouldn't be the last. We'd establish a direct line for families to reach us when children are facing time-sensitive medical situations. She looked directly at Thomas. Obviously, Emma's treatment and recovery would be our immediate priority. But, if you're comfortable with it, we'd like to document the process to show other families that there is hope, that there are resources available. Thomas's mind was racing. This was far beyond anything he had imagined when he stood in the blazing sun this morning. What would this mean for Emma? What would we have to do? First and foremost, it means Emma gets the treatment she needs, Margaret explained. Our charity would cover the full cost of her experimental treatment immediately. But we'd also like to share her story with the media, with other families, to show that childhood cancer doesn't have to be a financial death sentence for families. Princess Charlotte added, of course, we'd never do anything without your complete consent. If at any point you wanted privacy, that would be respected absolutely. But, Thomas, your courage today, standing in this heat for hours to fight for your daughter, that's exactly the kind of determination that inspires people to support our work. Thomas thought about Emma, at home with her grandmother, coloring pictures of princesses. Can I discuss this with my wife and with Emma herself? Of course, Princess Charlotte replied immediately. Take all the time you need. But, I don't want you to worry about the treatment costs while you're making this decision. Margaret will arrange for Emma's treatment to begin immediately, regardless of what you decide about the publicity aspects. Thomas felt tears coming again. Your Highness, I don't know how to thank you. When I came here today, I was just hoping for someone to listen. I never imagined. Sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the simplest acts of courage, Princess Charlotte said gently. You stood here for hours in terrible heat because you love your daughter. That kind of love deserves every support we can provide. She reached into her purse again and pulled out another card. This is my personal mobile number. I want you to call me tomorrow evening and let me know how Emma is feeling, and what you and Sarah decide about the publicity program. Thomas stared at the card in disbelief. You're giving me your personal phone number? Emma's story has touched me deeply, Princess Charlotte replied. Sometimes, as royals, we get so caught up in formal protocols that we forget we're supposed to be helping real people with real problems. You've reminded me today what this work is really about. A photographer nearby had been discreetly taking pictures throughout this second conversation. Princess Charlotte noticed and walked over to him. I'd like to ask a favor, she said to the photographer. Thomas here has shared something very personal with me today about his daughter Emma. If you publish any photos of our conversation, please be respectful of their family's privacy. The photographer nodded solemnly. Of course, Your Highness. Princess Charlotte returned to Thomas. There's one more thing I'd like to do, if you're comfortable with it. I'd very much like to meet Emma in person, when she's feeling up to it. Would it be possible for me to visit her? Thomas felt his knees go weak. You want to visit Emma? Very much, Princess Charlotte replied. I have a feeling she and I would have a lot to talk about, especially about brave princesses in stories. 2 weeks later, Thomas sat in Emma's hospital room watching his daughter color a picture of a castle. The experimental treatment had begun 5 days after his encounter with Princess Charlotte, and, while it was still too early to see dramatic results, Emma's energy seemed to be returning slowly. The room was filled with flowers, cards, and gifts from people all over the country who had heard Emma's story. What had started as one desperate father's plea had somehow become a symbol of hope for families facing impossible medical bills. "Daddy, is she really coming today?" Emma asked for the 10th time that morning, looking up from her coloring book with bright eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," Thomas replied, smoothing her hair. "Princess Charlotte should be here any minute." Sarah sat in the chair beside Emma's bed, still looking slightly stunned by everything that had happened. The experimental treatment was showing promising early signs, and, more importantly, Emma was smiling again. The fear and pain that had shadowed her face for months was gradually being replaced by the natural curiosity and joy of a healthy 8-year-old. A gentle knock on the door interrupted Thomas's thoughts. Margaret Wilson peered into the room with a warm smile. "Emma, are you ready for a very special visitor?" she asked. Emma nodded enthusiastically, clutching the picture she had been working on all morning. It showed a princess with long brown hair standing next to a little girl outside a castle that looked suspiciously like a hospital. Princess Charlotte entered the room quietly, wearing a simple yellow dress and carrying a small wrapped gift. She looked nervous, Thomas realized with surprise. For all her royal training and public appearances, visiting a sick child in the hospital seemed to affect her differently. "Hello, Emma," she said softly, approaching the bed slowly. "I'm Charlotte. Your daddy told me you like to draw pictures of princesses." Emma's eyes went wide, but she wasn't shy. "Are you really a princess? A real one?" "I really am," Princess Charlotte replied, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "And I've been very excited to meet you. Your daddy says you're incredibly brave." "I don't feel brave," Emma said honestly. "Sometimes I feel scared." Princess Charlotte's expression grew more serious. "Do you know what I think? I think being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you keep going even when you are scared. And, from what I've heard, you've been doing exactly that." Emma considered this for a moment, then held up her picture. "I drew this for you. It's you and me at a castle hospital where sick children get better." Princess Charlotte took the drawing with obvious emotion. "Emma, this is beautiful. This is the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given me." "Really?" Emma asked, pleased but skeptical. "Really," Princess Charlotte assured her. "In fact, I'd like to hang this in my office, if that's all right with you. That way, every time I'm working on helping other sick children, I'll remember you and how brave you are." Emma beamed with pride. Thomas felt tears threatening again, but these were entirely different tears than the ones he'd cried in desperation 2 weeks ago. "I brought you something too," Princess Charlotte said, handing Emma the wrapped package. "But it's not just from me. It's from children all over England who heard your story and wanted you to know they're thinking about you." Emma unwrapped the gift carefully. Inside was a beautiful hardcover book called The Brave Princess Emma, and, when Emma opened it, she gasped with delight. It was a custom-made storybook featuring a character that looked exactly like her, going on adventures and helping other children who were facing difficult challenges. "The story says that Princess Emma was the bravest princess in all the land," Princess Charlotte explained, "because she never gave up hope, and she always thought about helping others even when she was facing her own challenges." Emma flipped through the pages, her eyes growing wider with each illustration. "She looks just like me. And, look, Daddy, there's a picture of you too." Thomas looked over Emma's shoulder and saw that the book indeed featured illustrations of their entire family, depicted as characters in a fairy tale where love and determination overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. "There's something else," Princess Charlotte said gently. "Emma, your doctors tell me that your treatment is working very well. But, more than that, your story has helped us create a new program to help other children who need expensive treatments." She pulled out an official-looking document. "We're calling it the Emma Harrison Emergency Treatment Fund. Because of you, 20 other children have already received help for treatments their families couldn't afford." Emma looked confused. "Because of me?" Because your daddy was brave enough to stand in the hot sun for hours just to try to help you, Princess Charlotte explained. When people heard about how much your parents love you and how hard they were fighting for you, they wanted to help. Not just your family, but other families facing the same scary situation. Sarah spoke up for the first time. Emma, you've become famous for being brave. Families all over the country know your name now. Am I really helping other sick kids? Emma asked, her voice filled with wonder. You absolutely are, Princess Charlotte confirmed. In fact, I was wondering if you might be interested in a very special job. We need someone to help us choose which children should receive help from the Emma Harrison Fund. Someone who understands what it's like to be sick and scared, but who also knows how important it is to keep hoping. Emma sat up straighter in her bed. You want me to help decide who gets help? When you're feeling better, of course, Princess Charlotte said quickly. And only if you want to. But I think you might be the perfect person to help us understand which families need our help the most. Thomas watched his daughter's face transform. For months, Emma had felt powerless, a victim of circumstances beyond anyone's control. Now Princess Charlotte was offering her the chance to help other children in similar situations. I want to help, Emma said firmly. When I grow up, I always wanted to help sick children get better. Can I start now? I think you already have started, Princess Charlotte replied warmly. Just by being brave and letting people hear your story. She stood up from the bed, but Emma reached for her hand. Princess Charlotte, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. In all the princess stories, the princess saves everyone else. But you saved me. Does that make you the most special princess of all? Princess Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, and, for a moment she couldn't speak. When she found her voice, it was soft and emotional. Emma, I think you have that backwards. You saved yourself by being so brave. And you saved other children by showing everyone how important it is to help families like yours. If anyone is the most special princess in this story, it's definitely you. Emma smiled the biggest smile Thomas had seen from her in months. Then, we're both princesses in this story. Yes, Princess Charlotte agreed, squeezing Emma's hand. We're both princesses, and we're going to help lots of other children together. As Princess Charlotte prepared to leave, she turned to Thomas one final time. Thank you for standing in that blazing sun, she said quietly. Thank you for not giving up. You saved your daughter's life, but you also reminded me why this work matters so much. Thomas looked around the room at his daughter, surrounded by love and hope and the promise of a healthy future, and realized that sometimes the most extraordinary miracles begin with the simplest acts of determination. Emma was going to be all right. More than that, she was going to spend her life helping other children be all right too. The man who had stood in the blazing sun for hours had done more than save his daughter. He had changed the way an entire charity program operated, inspired thousands of people to donate money for childhood medical research, and given his daughter a purpose that would guide her for the rest of her life. But, most importantly, he had reminded a princess that behind every formal request and official application was a real family with real love and real hope. And that, Thomas realized, was something worth standing in the blazing sun for.